Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. In today's video, I'm going to be tying up one of my all-time favorite Chironomid patterns. This one's the anti-static bag Chironomid. I'm going to be using Togen's barbless scud hooks. This one's a size 10. And for that, to pair it up nicely, I'm using Togen's tungsten premium beads. This is 7/64 or 2.8 millimeter in black nickel. For the gills, I like to use a really fine thread. So for this, I'll be using Semperfli's Nano Silk Professional. This is a 20 denier, really small stuff. And then the gill material, I'm using Uni Stretch in white. For my thread for the body of this bug, I'm using Semperfli Nano Silk 50 denier. And then for the collar or the thorax, I'm going to be using Semperfli Classic Wax. It's a beautiful rusty brown color in 12/0. For the underbody, we're using this good Togen's Chrony Skin. This is holographic mocha. And then for the wire rib, I'm using Semper wire. This is 0.2 millimeter. And then to follow that wire, I'm using the anti-static bag from Togen's. This is pre-cut strips. They're tapered from 0.5 millimeter to 2 millimeter. And then for the wing buds, Semperfli Goose Biots. You can either use cinnamon color or their brown color is really nice as well, depending on if you want a rusty brown thorax or a burnt orange thorax. Then to make it tough, none other than the Golf Thinmin UV resin. I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. This particular pattern has done extremely well for me. There's a lot of great instructional Chironomid videos out there, but this pattern is responsible for, I'd say, probably 60+% of all the trout throat samples that I took last season. So it's a very important pattern to have in your box, and hopefully from this video you can learn a few tips and tricks of what I use to tie this pattern very consistently, and you can change up the size. I typically tie this on these scud hooks. I'll tie them in a size 10, a size 12, and a size 14, and then that would coincide with the curved nymph hook patterns, which I'll tie these in a size 18, a size 16, a size 14, and if there's bombers coming off, then I'll even do this in a size 12. The reason that I encourage you to tie these in a scud hook variety as well as a curved nymph hook is some days the trout will be particularly finicky, so they'll want a little bit more of an active chironomid. Maybe the water's a little bit more choppy, maybe the chironomids are moving a little bit faster to the surface. So in those instances, if they're just not loving the curved nymph style hook, then I'll throw on one of these scud hooks, and that seems to do the trick more often than not. So as I'm tying these materials in, it's a very specific process that I follow. So I start with the wire near the bead, and then following about a bead and a half length, then I'll add in the ASB strip, and then near the tail of this fly, I'll then add the Chrony skin, and that just gives it a really nice seamless taper. Those materials kind of step down in size, so they follow the curvature of the hook very nicely. This Semperfli Nano Silk is really nice stuff to work with. For this size 10, I'm using the 50 denier thread. I'll use 30 denier for the smaller ones, and when you spin it counterclockwise, it flattens out really nicely. I used to exclusively tie with UTC 70, but I find the Nano Silk flattens out really nice, as well as their classic wax thread. As long as you counterspin it, you can get a really thin, seamless sort of taper on these chironomids. So about a bead and a half length back, you're going to want to grab 2 of these Semperfli goose biots and tie them in about 2/3 of the way up that goose biot, and I'll show you why after. You get a cool little wing bud effect when you do it this way. And then I make sure that that's nice and centered, and then I'll pull that thread tight and then wrap those cut ends in nicely. And here all I'm doing is just building up a little bit of a taper. Be sure to counterspin that thread and keep that as flat as possible. That looks pretty good right there. And then we'll just put a securing whip finish in to keep that thread locked in, and then into the bobbin cradle and out of the way. And here's the fun part. So we're going to start with the chrony skin and give a few wraps here underneath the ASB and the Semper wire. And then you're going to just want to have touching wraps. What's nice, if there is any inconsistencies in your thread with that taper, you can use this thin chrony skin and give a couple of wraps to kind of fill in any voids, and it is slick stuff. It's really nice to work with, and this makes for a good taper, and then it's going to make it that much easier when you wrap your Semper wire, and then your ASB, it's going to follow suit. The reason I add the wire to these ASB chironomids is it adds a little bit of a three-dimensional effect to those segments on the bug, as well as it provides a little trough or a guideline for your ASB to follow up as you're wrapping this. I find if I'm not using a wire as a guide, that ASB wants to jump around a little bit, so it's a little bit more finicky to work with. So this trick has really made these bugs very consistent for me. And then you can try to get 7 segmented wraps in there, and they're tapering a little bit larger as you get to the bead of this fly. Couple of wraps in front of that wire and behind, and then just helicopter it out of the way. And then I always just do a 2-turn whip finish just to secure that material in. You can also do a half hitch when you just don't want that wire coming loose there. And then as you wrap this ASB, keep it as tight as you can to that Semper wire. And then we're going to lock that into place as well. Before you add resin, you can always adjust the wire to make sure that it's touching that ASB if any segments are kind of uneven. I'm quite particular with these bugs. I'm sure the fish don't mind, but heck, since I'm doing it, it's got to be perfect. And then you can go ahead and nip that nano silk out of the way. Then we're going to add the Semperfli classic wax thread. They've done a whole new assortment of colors. They've got rusty brown, they've got burnt orange, they've got watery olive, some of the most common UTC 70 colors. They're wizards over there. They match those colors perfectly, and their dye lots are so consistent. I can't say enough good things about the classic wax thread. It's just beautiful stuff to work with. They've done a great job with that thread. And now is the finicky part. So those goose biots, you're going to want to fold those forward, give it a couple of wraps to lock those in at about a 45-degree angle heading up to that bead. And then you'll fold those back onto that thread and lock them in so that you have all the frayed ends. It looks super natural, like the original chironomids there, the natural bugs. This is the best way that I've found to tie in those wing buds. Nice and secure, they can take a beating, and they look really cool as well. So here I'm just going to add some Golf Thinman UV resin. Just a little drop on your bodkin will do ya. And I mentioned before that I tie these in 3 different sizes for these scud hooks. So for the size 10 scud, I'll use the tapered 0.5mm to 2mm ASB. For the size 12 scud, I'll use a 0.75mm ASB. And then for the size 14, I'll use a 0.5mm ASB. It's all pre-cut, great stuff from Togans. And then one last tip I can leave you with is when you're selecting a UV light, you want to make sure that you've got a good UV light. Don't cheap out on them. You want to make sure that the the power of that UV light is matched with what the UV resin of choice needs. So in this case, I use Togen's UV lights. It's great stuff, very economically priced. It does the job. It hardens the stuff up so nicely. Like I said, these flies can sure take a beating. Some days I've caught 30 to 40 fish on one single chironomid. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you learned some great tips and tricks. I guarantee you, if you tie this and get it close to how I've done it here, you're going to be having a great time and catch a lot of fish. Be sure to subscribe to my channel on YouTube, and I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video.